Welcome GeoTrig, this is section 4-1 congruent figures. The essential question is, how can you determine if two figures are congruent? Let's begin. So what are congruent figures? These are two figures that have the same size and same shape. You can slide them around, you can turn them, you can flip them, and they will stay congruent. So what I got here is two different shapes, and these are congruent. They're the same exact shape, this one's been rotated a little bit. They are still the same shape. I can even mirror this one. I can flip it. I can just flip it on the x-axis like this, and it's still the same shape. I can move it around, and it's still congruent shapes. So it doesn't matter. You can move them around. They still stay congruent. Congruent figures. So a definition of congruent polygons. If two congruent polygons have corresponding parts, so that means that their angles and their sides are matched. So when you name congruent polygons, you can list the corresponding vertices in the same order. So, for example, the polygon ABCD is congruent to polygon EFGH. So it must be in the same order. I couldn't call this polygon GFEH. Those wouldn't be congruent. You have to keep it in the same order. So I know like the A and the E points match up, the F and the B points match up, C and G matches up, and D and H. So when you have congruent polygons, we can say the line segments are congruent. So AB is congruent to EF. So this AB and EF are congruent. BC is congruent to FG, BC and FG, and so on. Same thing with the angles. So angle A is congruent to angle E, and angle D is congruent to angle H. So the sides and the angles are congruent. So are these triangles congruent? I can kind of prove that. To prove that these triangles are congruent, we have to have all the same angle. So the angle is congruent, and we have to have all sides congruent. So as long as all the angles are congruent and all the sides are congruent, they are congruent triangles. Well, let's look at this. We know that angle A is congruent with angle E because they both have one tick mark. So that checks off. Angle B and angle D have two tick marks, so angle B is congruent to angle D. Now, this angle C in both cases, or we shouldn't call it angle C, angle BCA and angle DCE, these are congruent because they're vertical angles. So I can say, and you have to be very careful how you name these. The order matters here, because let's start with at the double line. So BCA has to be congruent with angle DCE. It's got to match up. It's got to be the corresponding parts, because the B corresponds to D. If I said congruent to ECD, I wouldn't be correct. So there's my angles. Let's talk about sides. We know segment AB and segment ED both have one tick, so we know that AB is congruent with segment, they call this ED, because it says that. And now, what else do we know? Well, see these numbers 4 and 6? BC is length 4 and CD are length 4, so we know those two segments are congruent. So I can say BC is congruent with segment DC. And the same thing with these AC and EC are both 6, so I can say AC is congruent with EC. So all three angles are the same, all three sides are the same, so I can say triangle, let's call it ABC, is congruent. And we got to keep this consistent with triangle EDC, because I proved all the angles are congruent and all the sides are congruent. Alright, let's try another proof of this. So I want to prove that these two triangles are congruent. So prove LMN is congruent with LON. These two triangles in shape, and notice they share this one side. So the given information here, LM is congruent with LO. So I'm going to start labeling these. It's good to practice this. So LM, I'm going to put one tick there, is congruent with LO. Good. Now we also know that segment MN is congruent with ON. So MN, I'm going to put two ticks, is congruent with ON. Measure of angle M is congruent with measure of angle O. So I can do one arc for M is congruent with O. And the last one, MLN is congruent to OLN. So MLN, I'll put two arcs, is congruent with OLN. So I'll also put two arcs. Okay, so that's all our given information. Let's prove this. So I'm going to do statement number 1. Statement number 1 is going to be all the given. I'm just not going to write it again. all the given stuff. I'm just going to point there. I'm going to be lazy right now because I'm not writing those again. And the reasons, it's given. Wait, I won't be lazy. Watch this, I'll cheat. So statement number 1 is all of this. And it's given. Ha. So it's number 2. Well, if I know all that, well, I gotta know the rest of these angles here. So one thing I can say is this side that they both share, well, it's congruent. So we can say segment LN is congruent with segment NL because they are the same. I can say they're the same segment. So I know these sides are congruent with each other. So we know both sides of the triangle, all 3 sides are congruent. Now we just have to worry about this last angle. But here's the thing with triangles. If we know one angle and we know another angle, this last angle here, it's, you know, all angles for triangles have to add up to 180, right? So if we know that these angles have to match and these angles have to match, this last angle has to match because there's only one possible measurement for this angle for both of these, and it has to be the same. So for the third statement, I can say measure of angle, or I can say angle, let's go M and L. M and L has to be congruent with angle O and L. Why? Because we're going to say the measures of angles have to add up. Measures of angles of a triangle have to add to 180. That has to happen. So now that we have, that's our third angle here. So we got all 3 angles, got all 3 sides. The last thing I can say is triangle LMN is congruent to triangle LON. Why? Because all sides and angles are congruent. And that's it. Alright, try an example. Pause the video. Okay, so we're given a load of information and I want to prove this triangle. So my statement number 1 is my givens. It says angle A, let's do this a different color. Angle A is congruent to angle D. AE is congruent to DC. And EB is congruent to CB. And BA is congruent to BD. So statements, I'm going to say my statements are all this given stuff. So I can type it out. So my statement number 1 is all that given stuff, blah, blah, blah up here. I don't want to write it out. The reason for that is that's what's given. Step number 2. Well, that means all 3 sides. Oh, I shouldn't have erased all that. Okay, I know all 3 sides because that information was given to me. But then I also know one of these angles are the same. I got to prove the other 2 angles. Well, let's go with that. The neat thing here is I got vertical angles. So this angle right here has to be equal to that angle. So I can say angle, let's call that ABE, is congruent with angle DBC. And we can say that because of vertical angles. Vertical angles. Now step number 3. I got to get that last angle. But since I know 2 of the angles, I know this third angle has only one option. So I can say angle AEB is congruent with angle DCB. Why can I say that? Because those angles have to add up to 180. Angles of the triangle add up to 180. So now that I know all the sides and I know all the angles, I can say the end. Triangle AEB is congruent with triangle DCB. Why? Because you know all sides and angles are congruent. There you go. Okay, pause the video. Okay, so let's try this. If HIJK is congruent to LM and O, what are the congruent corresponding parts? So HIJK is L, M, and O. So what I can say here first is let's do the sides. I know side HI is going to be congruent with side LM. You just have to make sure like the matching stuff works out. Don't just look at the diagrams, because diagrams can be wrong. So HI is going to be congruent with LM. And you can kind of look at that just by the matching letters right here. So I know that IJ is congruent to LN or MN. IJ is congruent to MN. So IJ, MN. Okay, next thing I can say is JK is congruent to NO. So JK is congruent with NO. I'm going to label that. And the last one I can say is KH is congruent with OL. So I'm going to do 4 ticks. Good. Now that's what I can say about the sides, and I can also say things about the angles. So the angles are going to match up as well. So H is going to match up with angle L. So angle H is congruent with angle L. And then I can say angle I is going to be congruent with the matching letter M. So angle I is congruent with angle M. Next thing you say is angle J is congruent to angle N. And you can say angle K is congruent with angle O. And that's it. Those are the matching angles, those are the matching sides. Done.